Hello, Michael McShane is my name, and in this presentation we'll be looking at the Killiney estate of Robert Warren. We'll be looking back on the history of the estate prior to Warren's arrival in 1834, his grandiose plans to develop a new town, and we'll be looking at the buildings which he did eventually complete, along with the work on the park and the monuments. We'll also be discussing his eventual downfall and his legacy. Before we get down to the detail of the presentation, I'd like to give some background context to those of you who may not be familiar with the location. Killiney is a suburb of Dublin. It's 8 miles south of the city and located on the coast. You're looking here at Killiney Obelisk, which is the iconic focal point of the district. A public park with fantastic walks and views over the Bay of Killiney, which has been compared to the Bay of Naples, and in fact many of the house names bear Italian names. The obelisk is the centre of the estate, and the main seat of the estate is what's now known as Killiney Castle. This was the main house, which was built in 1742 by John Malpas, which Robert Warren acquired in 1843 and adapted to his taste. We're now looking at the estate from the hotel on the left, looking at Telegraph Tower in the distance. That's Dalkey Hill, now coming around to Killiney Hill and back around to the obelisk. This is the northernmost part of the estate. We have the Telegraph Tower, part of the Martello Tower infrastructure built in the early 1800s. You're looking at Dalkey Quarry there at the back of Dalkey Hill, used to construct Dún Harbour. We're now looking at a view from the coast, where Robert Warren had his first railway station constructed just above the White Rock Beach, and you will see the location for Mount Eagle in the distance there. This is the location of the railway station where the train is now passing through. Short-lived due to its very precarious position and not easy to get to. We're now looking at Dalkey Hill and back up to the Telegraph Tower. Warren had planned to develop all of the hill which you see before you here in a large residential development, which thankfully never went ahead. It's now a public park and very popular location for outings. We're now looking back at Killiney Hill. Again, you can see the obelisk, the focal point in the distance there, and just to our left appearing is the art gallery, which was built in the grounds of Mount Eagle, which was one of Warren's first speculative developments. This slide indicates the ownership of the estate over the years, going back to earliest times when the Talbots de Malahide were granted the estate back in the 13th century. Subsequently, the estate has gone through many name changes. Mount Mapus in 1740, when John Malpas acquired the estate. It was later renamed Roxburgh and subsequently Loftus Hill by Henry Loftus in 1764. It then reverted to Mount Mapus Scalp William at the time Robert Warren acquired the estate, when the house was called Killiney Castle. Back in 1787, the major landowner in the area was John Malpas, who resided at Rochestown House, located here. He built Killiney Castle here as a speculative development, and was from his larger estate, which stretched from Grange up here down to Killiney Bay, that the Warren estate was eventually carved. This detail from the larger map shows the house which John Malpas built in 1741, which he named Mount Malpas. We now know it as Killiney Castle Hotel. The obelisk is located at the high point here, and this is Killiney Bay. Killiney village is in this location. This map of 1816 shows the three hills of the district, known as the Three Sisters: Telegraph Hill, Loftus Hill, and Rochestown Hill. We now know Telegraph Hill is Dalkey Hill and Loftus Hill is Killiney Hill. In 1787, the estate was listed as extending to 90 acres, but by the time of Robert Warren's death in 1869, he'd increased the size of the estate to 170 acres. And in this presentation, we'll be dealing with the walled enclosure following this line along Killiney Hill Road, through Killiney Village and back down to the coast, which was the main part of the Warren estate, fully secured and fortified with walls, stone walls at least 6 foot to 9 feet high, and then with the coast providing protection and further enclosure and security. Robert Warren, who was born in 1787, was a lawyer who worked out of Parnell Square in Dublin city centre. He lived in Clontarf on the north side of Dublin and appears to have cut his teeth as a property developer and speculator in this location before he turned his attention to Killiney and South County Dublin. This is the great man himself, resplendent with his top hat and gloves. And this is one of his earlier developments in Clontarf, Baymont House, which he renamed Baymont Castle after changing the appearance of the house to include the neo-Gothic ornamentation, castellations. And just to bear in mind this image when we go on to look at the Killiney properties. Thomas Boucher, the previous owner of the Killiney Castle Estate, had died in 1832, and 2 years later the property was put up for sale in 1834. The description is interesting, and I'll read it to you here. This property seems peculiarly adapted for building speculation. The exquisite purity of the air, the perfect tranquility and security of the neighbourhood, the vast quantity of material consisting of the finest and largest blocks of granite, and the easy communication with Dublin, which the railroad now in progress will shortly afford, its present termination being within 1 mile of Killiney, all pointed out as the most desirable investment for capital which for a considerable period has been offered to the public in this country. Warren went on to be successful in the purchase of the property, and in March 1834 a notice appeared in the paper showing that Mount Malpas, as it was known, had been bought for £7,000. This map of 1837 gives a very good indication of the state of the estate when it was acquired by Robert Warren, and as you can see, very little existed in terms of buildings at that time apart from Killiney Castle itself and Mount Malpas Cottage in this location overlooking the bay. This is the original Mount Malpas house, now renamed Killiney Castle, with the adjoining outbuildings. One of the other existing buildings on the property at the time of Warren's acquisition was Mount Maples Cottage, which is located at the junction at the bottom of Victoria Road and the Vico Road. You can also see the commencement of the construction of a platform which was later to be the grounds of Mount Eagle. Every developer needs a good architect, and it was Robert Warren's nephew, Sandham Symes, who got the commission to design many of the properties in the Killiney estate. It appears that one of his first commissions was to remodel the existing Mount Malpas house, Killiney Castle, in the fashionable neo-Gothic style, with the adornments of castellations to create a castle effect which was fashionable at the time. This didn't go down particularly well with some of the establishment, and an article which appeared in the Dublin Penny Journal in 1834 described it thus: "The residence of some foolish city Goth, who has contrived to make a burlesque upon castellation by affixing certain indentures to the top of his house, like the toothed deed by which he himself was bound over to an attorney or dealer, and with the accompaniments of slashes in the walls, and things like mustard pots and pepper casters at the corners, has turned a good old plain country mansion into a Babel building, where all art is confounded, taste abused, and there it stands, like a fool upon a cock horse, nonsense set upon a hill." This is a postcard view from around the 1950s. And as it appears today. You can see the date above the doorway, 1741. Having acquired the estate, it didn't take Warren long to come up with a plan to exploit the natural attractions of the location. This was to be a new town, which he called Queenstown. In 1840, he appointed Hoskins and Sons architects to come up with the master plan for the new town. The scale and ambition was enormous. As you can see in the plan here, the obelisk was to be the focal point for the entire development. The existing Killiney Castle was in this location, and Warren had already built his show houses, Victoria Castle and Mount Eagle here. One of the centerpieces of the design was a block of terraced houses consisting of 36 houses in total, and a second block in this location here. There were also to be 100 detached houses and a number of semi-detached houses in this location here. As part of his marketing campaign, Warren commissioned Joseph Patrick Haverty to prepare an artist's impression. And you can see here the impact the scheme would have had on Killiney Hill and would have completely dominated the landscape. I've taken the liberty here of superimposing an image of Sorrento Terrace onto the central block in Warren's Queenstown scheme, and you can see here the sheer scale. This terrace would have been roughly 5 times the size of Sorrento Terrace as we know it. The existing show houses are also shown. We've got Victoria Castle, Mount Maples and Mount Eagle here. There was also to be a central connecting bridge linking Killiney Hill to Dalkey Hill here, and a centrepiece church, a modest little church in this location here. The artist's impression gives us a selection of prospective house types, something to suit all budgets. I think everybody would agree that we're very lucky that this scheme did not proceed, as the hill would have been lost as a public amenity and Killiney would just not be the same. We'll now take a look at the Warren houses of the Killiney estate. With the exception of Killiney Castle itself, all of the houses which Warren built were for speculation. And this advert, which appeared in 1845, has a number of the properties available to rent. Killiney Castle was included, Victoria Castle, which we now know as Isha Castle or Enya's Castle, Mount Eagle, Mount Malpas, located in Killiney. Also, he had retained a couple of properties in Clontarf, and the house Mount Prospect is mentioned in this advert also. We'll now go into each house in more detail. We've already looked at Killiney Castle. And we'll now take a look at Malpas Cottage, as it was known when it was acquired by Warren. This is a photograph of the house taken around 1910, and it appears to have been remodeled, possibly at the time when Mount Eagle and the Queenstown development was taking place. This house can't be seen from the road as such, but you may be familiar with this large granite retaining wall on the Vicar Road, which supports the platform from which the house is built. We now move to Victoria Castle, which was designed by his nephew Sandham Symes, and this is located on Victoria Road. This was the first house to be part of the Queenstown development, and this engraving of the house appeared in the Irish Penny Journal in 1841, built on lot number 1. This photograph of Victoria Castle was taken about 1988, and you can see some of the fine ashlar granite stonework, which was typical of Symes' work at this period. Moving on to Mount Eagle, which was built commencing in 1837 on the Vicar Road. This was a model which was made by the architect, and this really demonstrates the problems of building on Killiney Hill. In order to build a house, it was necessary to construct a very large retaining wall to create a level platform from which to build a house. And the amount of work involved in doing this was very significant, and I suspect ultimately led to Queenstown not progressing any further due to the costs involved. Again, you can see here some of the fine ashlar cut granite stonework on the seaside elevation of Mount Eagle. The final house we're going to look at is Wyvern. This house was built by Warren in 1860 for his son, Robert Warren Jr., who lived there until his death in 1894. The grounds of the house was developed as the Wyvern Estate, and the house still exists today, although subdivided into a number of apartments. We'll now take a look at the gate lodges of the Warren Estate. This is an interesting document which appeared in the Tithe Allotment Book records of 1846. Unusual to have a sketch in a rent collection or rate collection document, but it's useful in that it shows us three of the lodges to Mr. Warren's estate. Henry Hanlon lived in this lodge. Michael Kenny lived in the front lodge of the Killiney Castle Hotel, and Ed Healy lived in the next lodge, which is at the northern or southernmost entrance to the hotel. This no longer exists. Being such an extensive estate and with such a long boundary meant that there were a total of 8 lodges along the periphery, controlling the comings and goings to the estate. We've already discussed the first 3 lodges. This lodge no longer exists, but this would have controlled the access to the rear stables and outbuildings of the Killiney Castle Hotel. The second lodge is now the main entrance to the Killiney Castle Hotel, and again built with the finely cut granite ashlar walling, possibly designed by Sandham Symes. The third lodge, which is at the southernmost gate to the hotel, no longer exists. This lodge is now at the main entrance to Killiney Hill Park, and it's familiar to us all today as a coffee shop. This photograph from the Lawrence collection was taken around about 1880, and you can see the gates are well locked and controlled by the lady of the lodge here. Moving along Killiney Hill Road, we now come to Victoria Lodge, which is the gate lodge to Victoria Castle. This is right in the heart of Killiney Village and a major landmark in the area. Again, this has been attributed to Sandham Symes and is done in the neo-Gothic castellated design. This is an interesting photograph, again from the Lawrence collection circa 1880. Here you can see the existing gate. The gates are existing and controlling access to Victoria Castle, and you can see the tracks from the carriages going down Victoria Road. Also, there's a notice over this entrance here saying private property, no thoroughfare. Continuing under the archway, we make our way further down Victoria Road. And turning, we come down to the next gate lodge, which controlled access at the southernmost part of the estate on the Vicar Road. This property is now known as Lush Beag, again in the familiar cut granite ashlar external walling, and this lodge was bought some time ago by Bono as it adjoins his property and provides additional security to his grounds. We now move back along the Vicar Road to the junction with the Dalkey end of the Vicar Road, and we'll have a look at this lodge which no longer exists here. This Lawrence photograph of, again, about 1880 is quite interesting. The detail on these Lawrence photographs is fantastic. The resolution really is incredible, because when we zoom in here, you can see that the Vicar Road comes to an abrupt ending at this point. There was a 9-foot high granite wall at this point. This is the road from Dalkey, and the lodge was located at this position here. This is the Vicar Road before the opening up to the public. You can see on this 1888 map that the lodge was in a ruinous state, and you'll note there's a level difference between the lower Vicar Road and the upper Dalkey section of the road. When the road was subsequently opened years later, it was realigned and the levels changed. The other lodge, which can be noted on this drawing, was at the end of Torker Road. Again, this lodge no longer exists. This is the lower road and the lodge, which is beside Sunnyside. And Sunnyside, as it exists today, this is where the Dalkey end of the Vicar Road would have been a cul-de-sac, and we now have the open road as we know it. Just coming back to another little item from the Lawrence photograph. It's hard to read here, but there's a notice on the wall which comes from the Vicar Road down to the railway track here, and that notice reads, "To be let for building." So The Warrens, even though Robert Warren Sr. had died, the son, Robert Warren Jr., was still anxious to develop the Vico Road site on the Vico Fields. And this sign here would have been visible to passengers on the railway line passing along the coast. And you'll see in the corner here a horse and cart loaded down with hay. Again, an ad from 1856 extolling the virtues of the building ground, which we were fortunate that Warren didn't manage to develop. We'll now take a look at Killiney Hill Park and its monuments. This view, which was probably painted in the 1860s, is incredible because, in fact, it has changed very little over the years. You'll notice here the banqueting tables, the wishing stone, Telegraph Hill, and the gentry enjoying a fine day out in a location which is actually only about 25 minutes away by train at that moment in time. And here's the view today. The old banqueting tables are still there, Telegraph Tower, the wishing stone, obviously the obelisk itself, and the smaller Bouchier's obelisk hidden away in the undergrowth down here. This is a Lawrence photograph of the obelisk, which was first built by John Malpas in 1742 and was subsequently repaired by Robert Warren in 1850. This is the Telegraph Tower, which was built at the time of the installation of the Martello Tower system of defences along the coast, which was in the early 1800s. Again, Robert Warren has left his mark here with a plaque to show that he carried out repairs to this building back in around about 1851. This is the wishing stone, which is up beside the obelisk, and the date on this structure is 1852. And this is Bouchier's obelisk, which is the smaller obelisk down below the main obelisk. It is hidden away, but it's worth checking out because the history is that this monument was built by the previous owner to Robert Warren, Thomas Bouchier, in pursuance of the will of Mr. Mapus, who left a large sum of money for the erection of a monument to his family. And this is the smaller obelisk which was built. This is another portrait of Robert Warren, founder of the Holy Trinity Church in Killiney, and he was a major benefactor to the church. He contributed the plot of land upon which the church was built and contributed substantially to the fund for the erection of the church. This is a view taken in 1867 from the grounds of Mount Auburn, when it was possible to get such a good view of the church prior to the growth of trees in the intervening years. This is the steeple, and again showing some of the detail. This church was designed yet again by Sandham Symes and displays a lot of the design features that we discussed earlier in his other buildings on the Killiney estate. We now come to the railway, which was a major driving force in terms of Warren's plans to develop the estate. The first railway station to open in Killiney was Obelisk Hill Station in 1854. The reason Obelisk Hill Station was built in this location was that Robert Warren controlled the site through which the railway had to pass to get to Bray and beyond to Wexford. So Warren commanded quite a sacrifice from the Railway Development Company to construct this station for him, which he planned to use to develop his site. But given its location, it didn't last particularly long and was subsequently relocated to the second Killiney railway station in 1882, which was then amalgamated with the Ballybrack stations to the current location in 1882 at this point. You can see here the single track railway. The track was doubled in 1882, so this photograph is probably from around about 1880. This is a view which appeared in 1854, showing the tunnel which was cut from the Dalkey side, giving access to the Killiney section of track, and this is the Khyber Pass Hotel above. This is a view of the remains of Warren's Obelisk Hill Station, which was described as perched upon a rock, which you can see here. This is White Rock Beach, and the pedestrian access, the bridge over the railway, which was built originally as the access to the railway station, which was located along here. The platform ran from roughly this location here to about this location. But as you can see, the steep climb up to the Vicar Road meant that it was a very short-lived event. This is an invite from Robert Warren to those who were lucky enough to be able to pay a visit to the hill and park. Robert Warren died in June of 1869, and this plaque was erected to his memory in the Church of the Holy Trinity. Upon his death in 1869, Robert Warren's finances had deteriorated to such an extent that the Landed Estates Court stepped in to take on the debt and to recompense the creditors. Warren's involvement in other speculative developments in the Galloping Green and Fox Rock areas had been unsuccessful and dragged down his entire estate and put his own Killiney estate into jeopardy. The Landed Estates Court is comparable, I suppose, to today's NAMA, which we'd be familiar with, who acquired the property and sold off sections of the estate to recover the outstanding funds. This was the map which was prepared as part of the sales package for the estate. And the artist's impression of Killiney Castle, which was, I suppose, part of the sales brochure. Just a detail again from the map, and here you can see the main house in this location, the outbuildings, and then we have a smithy at the back. And this is the site for the Holy Trinity Church, which did not form part of the sale. This lot highlighted in red here was Victoria Castle. Now, Esher Castle or Enyas Castle on the Victoria Road, and this included a group of buildings on the beach which are known as White's Cottages. This is a coffee shop now today, and 2 lodges were also included in the sale on the Vico Road and Victoria Lodge back up to the village, as we discussed earlier. This property was bought by Humphrey Lloyd for £5,000, which was a significant sum of money at the time, and Robert Warren Jr., along with the funds from this sale and the help of family and friends, was able to pay off the debt and managed to save a substantial portion of the remainder of the estate. Robert Warren Jr. was as determined a developer as his father, and this plan, which is held by the Irish Architectural Archive and dated 1878, shows a development by his architect Charles Geoghegan for another housing development on Killiney Hill, Killiney Estate, and around the edge of the drawing a number of ready-to-go designs for villas on the site. We've reached the end of the slideshow, and in conclusion, I suppose it has to be said that Robert Warren's legacy, although not his intended legacy, has been a positive one to Killiney and the surrounding area, in that he restored many of the original monuments that are on the hill and built some new ones, and he's left his mark in terms of how we see the hill today, and we're lucky that it's now in the public domain. If there's any further information you require, if you want to delve further into some of the items we touched upon, for instance the opening of the Vico Road, there are more complete articles on the website killineyhistory.ie, and I encourage you to have a look there and enjoy the further reading. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.